On today's show, the evolution of the Capitals prospect pool from one of the worst in the NHL to respectable. Next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the evolution of the Capitals prospect pool. At one time, it was considered one of the worst in the NHL. Now, I guess I'm going to say it's at least respectable. What changed? I'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about the draft class and the pipeline strengths. As I've talked on this show, if you're an everydayer, that the Capitals are really good right now. They are going to be even that much better years to come. After that, I'll talk about Cole Hutson and the next wave. But just to get it going here, talking about that respectable prospect pool and what changed. And how did we get into this position in the first place? I think it was a change in attitude. That for the longest time, the Capitals were in win-now mode. You guys remember that around the 2018 season or so, a little before and a little bit after, that the Capitals were trying to squeeze all of the juice that they possibly could out of that, what they call rock thread era. I guess what I would say is post-2018 after the Stanley Cup, that there was a feeling within the Capitals organization that roster that was out on the ice could win another cup, or maybe they just needed to, acquire this player or that player. And what happened is they depleted the prospect pool by trading this prospect for a rental, that prospect for a rental plus. That I think the Capitals were in a really bad position. And, you take a look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, for example, they are in a bad position because of that. They waited too long to try to make any changes. And now they're hoping for big changes. And I think the good thing about the Capitals is they recognized the position that they were in, and they had a change in attitude. And I think that a lot of that came after the Peter Laviolette era. I think there was a mandate back then to win another Stanley Cup and not to really utilize the youth. You guys remember that they didn't want to, Peter Laviolette did not want to have Connor McMichael out on the ice. They wanted to go with more of the sure thing. Former GM Chris Patrick and the Capitals realized that ship had sailed. It is time to turn the page and start to fix this roster that wasn't built for much of anything. So let's dive into that. How did the Capitals go from one of the worst prospect pools? And that pool is going to feed the Capitals organization in the years to come. And it wasn't that long ago. And the Capitals fans, you know what I'm talking about. The prospect pool wasn't great, like I said. And like I mentioned off the top there, that it was kind of a joke, that one of the worst prospect pools in the entire NHL. And, you could take a look at the Hershey roster, maybe glance overseas, check the junior guys, and think to yourself, none of these guys are going to fix the Capitals in relative short term here, that there were not the players. There just wasn't a blue chipper, I guess I would say, anywhere out on the ice. And there was no guy that you could point to and say, yeah, that is the future Capitals star right there. And, I've talked about on the show, and it's something that Capitals fans don't like to talk about, is just the poor judgment at times. You think of George McPhee, you think of the Philip Forsberg for the Martin Erat and Michael Lotta deal, that, there was just some poor, hasty decisions that put the Capitals in a bad position. But fast forward a couple years now, there's actually some juice. There is some mojo. There is a feeling of optimism. I'm feeling optimistic about the future of the Capitals. And to be clear here, I'm feeling good about the current team. I mean, you take a look at what they were able to accomplish, but I think this team is built to be a winner for years and years to come. And the first player we got to talk about, of course, is Ryan Leonard. Of course, he moved on from his college days, knocking it out of the park at the NCAA and the world stage. And at the tail end of the season there at Boston College, after that season wrapped up, he joined the Capitals in their pursuit for the playoffs. And I think that, a lot of fans, myself included, were thinking that he was just going to be that goal-scoring fuel. But to be clear here and to look back on it, it wasn't fair to put that kind of pressure on him. I think that what we see from him, the work that he's put in this summer, and then what we see out on the ice once he has a full season playing NHL games, I think that he is going to be amazing. This kid plays like he's been shot out of a cannon. He has that physical game, physical, fearless, doesn't care who you are. He will go through you, around you, or both in the same shift. And some people want to dub him, and I've kind of done that to an extent, as Tom Wilson 2.0. If you believe it, I think he's even a better player. He's not just a hitter. He's got hands. He's got the skill set that, despite what we saw at the, in the latter part of the season in the playoffs, that wasn't fair to judge. I think that what we saw from him on the college level, on the world stage, once he gets fully acclimated to pro hockey at the National Hockey League level, I think he is going to be next level. He got a taste of NHL action last season. The physical side came through first because that's instinct. Bit of a snarl to his game. I think that, I talk oftentimes on the show about a prototypical Capital. I think that next to that, you could see Ryan Leonard. He is the complete package as far as I'm concerned. But like I said, give him a full summer of training, and I think that he will have a whole new toolkit that he is going to use for the Capitals next season. Again, having him penciled in early, third line center, but who's ahead of him on the right side there is Protas and Wilson. But he could make it interesting because, what kind of camp does Protas and Wilson have? I think it would take quite a bit to supplant either one of those players. But hey, I don't want to cut Ryan Leonard short. I think that the sky is the limit. Next, we'll talk about Ivan Miroshnichenko, a guy that is used to overcoming adversity. A guy that would have gone much higher in the draft if it was not for that Hodgkin's lymphoma. But Ross Mahoney and his crew, they took a flyer on him, went to go visit him. He was so skinny, the jeans were hanging off of him, but he did not, fall over. He picked himself up by the bootstraps, went to the weight room, put on the weight, terminated that KHL contract, came over to the Capitals. He had a couple of cups of coffee with the big team, played very well in Hershey last year, and I think is going to be a big contributor to the Capitals. On the left side, I talked about, Tom Wilson 2.0 and Ryan Leonard. I've jokingly said, and somewhat serious, that Ivan Miroshnichenko could almost be Alex Ovechkin 2.0. I don't want to give him that honor yet until we see that in sustainable minutes on the big team. But Ivan Miroshnichenko has the tools in his tool set, a prototypical Capital, like I like to say, big frame, goal scores, release, plays both the finesse and power game. He checks a lot of boxes. And no doubt that there are some teams around the NHL that probably are thinking to themselves, we should have taken a flyer on him. 4 points in 18 games last year, not flashy, but you can see it coming. That was the big thing when he came over from the KHL to the NHL, as just getting acclimated to the ice rinks that are in America, as we know that it is different over in Russia. But Miro's camp expectations are going to be huge, but it's going to be difficult, right? As that there are a lot of players that are vying for positions. You could say that he could potentially be that second line left wing. You also could say that he could be that third line left wing. It all is going to depend on Andrew Cristall, who I'll talk about here in a little bit. But do you guys kind of sense what I'm talking about here? And do you start to feel the happiness and the optimism surrounding this team? I've already listed a couple players, and I'll talk about one here in a minute, that are just next level. Leonard, Miroshnichenko, and next I'm talking Andrew Cristall. And I have a hard time containing myself. I feel like next season he is going to take off, and NHL at large is going to take notice of who is this guy. And, honestly here, I think that most NHL fans that follow the game, at least remotely, are familiar with the name Andrew Cristall. But another player that went lower in the draft than I think many people had thought. We know that one of his biggest weaknesses was his size. He tried to fix, or he has worked on that. He's bulked up, hit the gym, the healthy proteins, that kind of thing. He can't fix other things like getting any taller. But his skating, his biggest knock on his game, has shown improvement. And why is that? These young guys, they'll hire their own coach, and that is what has put him in a good position. But when you talk about Andrew Cristall, the thing I'm going to say is the talent is undeniable. Passing, shooting, creativity, it is all there. Not the complete package, but darn near. If he had the size, I would say he is the complete package. One of the last players cut on the Capitals went to Kelowna, got traded out to Spokane. All kinds of records. This guy is next level, and I think that this could be the season that he sticks on the big team. He was this close last season. I think this very well could be the season. And the question on him has always been his skating. If he keeps it at passable NHL level, he's a legit top 6 scoring threat. Early take, really early take. If you do listen or watch this show on a regular basis, I see second line left wing. Huge. And let the positivity keep rolling. Ilya Protas. Yes, the younger brother of Alexei Protas, and wasn't, selected just because of the last name. This guy is legit. Underline, boldface, highlight, legit, big body, good hands. Skating is still coming along. Still young, still going to be an absolute knockout on the Capitals. And does that sound familiar? It should, because his brother has some of the same attributes. They went through the same thing, and it worked out. As you saw, Alexei just have absolute record numbers. Career numbers is what he put up last year. And then when you kind of take a look down a little bit more, widen the lens a little bit more, is you sprinkle in Tarek Parasek, Cole Hutson, Leon Mugli. Suddenly there's optimism in a spot where optimism wasn't there just a few years ago for the Capitals. That when you take a look at the prospects, and I know that there are some organizations out there that have some good prospects, but the Capitals are no joke, and I think are going to be a team to be reckoned with for years and years to come. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the draft class and the pipeline straight ahead. We've all been there before, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. Live music shouldn't be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever before. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals, and that is what I love about Game Time. Your favorite band, your favorite artist is coming to town, and sometimes you don't have time to get tickets, but it's actually advantageous as the prices get cheaper closer to showtime, and you can actually get panoramic views of what it'll look like from your seats. Listen to me, guys. Game Time is next level, so when you're going to your favorite concert this summer and fall, you need Game Time. So do what I did. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2 here, we're talking about the draft class and the pipeline. As I do believe this team is next level and a good position. It's just kind of being patient at the end of the day. You know, when Leonard, we're like, when? Next year? How soon can it be he's here? I think that those players will slowly start to trickle in very quickly here in the years to come. And I think the Capitals, you know, in general, have had themselves a good draft the last couple of years. And this past summer, for example, first round pick Lynden Lakovic, and yet again, prototypical, yes, that's what I'm dubbing them, 6'4", fast and skilled. And he's got an amazing skill set, and maybe a guy that wasn't on everyone's radar. And you know, to be clear here, it shouldn't be too surprising as he was down a bit in the draft. When you think about Leonard, he was higher up in the draft. So oftentimes when these players are a little bit lower, not everyone is familiar. But if you're not familiar, get to know him. He doesn't play like a power forward yet. I think that, you know, intrinsically that is not in his skill set. But when you take a look at his career playing so far with Moose Jaw and a leader amongst a poor team, I think that speaks the volumes of him last season. And, you know, not necessarily bad, but if he starts leaning into his size and keeps up that speed and skill, that is going to be a nightmare matchup. And, you know, I've said that before about some of the other bigger players. You can take a look at Alexei Protas, also a guy that's not intrinsically a tough guy. But, you know, and you don't need to be, you know, a tough guy per se. You don't need to be Tom Wilson. You don't need to be a bull in a china shop there. But if you can just lean into your strengths, finishing your checks, and, you know, just talking about Protas here briefly, we saw that from him a bit last year as well. Using his size to his advantage. I think that with Lynden, if he does that as well, maybe grow into that frame a little bit more, hit the gym, those lean proteins, I think that he will also be one heck of a player. And when you take a look at him, you know, he's a bit further out, but, you know, at that time that I think the Capitals roster, these young players that I'm talking about in this episode will start to have filled in the roster. And, you know, when you take a look at Lynden Lakovic, he is just going to be the cherry on top. Second round, Milton Gastrin out of Sweden already has pro habits, a good upside. And what are some of the things that we hear thrown around all the time is hockey IQ that you didn't hear years ago, or not nearly as much, that these young players, they are taught to play hockey from the youngest age, every facet of the game, and they see the ice very well. You saw that with Backstrom. You saw that with Oshie. I'm not saying it's exclusively a young man's thing, but it's something that you hear thrown around more and more. And Milton Gastrin, a smart player. I think he's got middle six center upside, the kind of guy coaches trust. And, you know, again, some of these guys are a bit more further out than others, but I think that he is there. And I think that he has a lot of those pro traits, I think, that will serve him well once he rises up through the ranks there. Third rounder, Maxim Schafer, high motor guy. If you take a look at the film, loves the forecheck, loves contact. And, you know, again, like I say, prototypical Capital. If you think back on the Capitals organization for years, it's been a very physical team. And I think that has been the identity of the Capitals for years. But the thing about him is not the most polished with the puck. So there is definitely some things for him to work on. But you need guys like that come off during playoff time. And I think that when you take a look at Maxim Schafer, I think that he is going to be big in that regard. If he can just work on, when he's in possession of the puck a little bit, those key things like that, I think that he could even be next level as well. Jackson Crowder and Aaron Dahlqvist, that's your bottom six grit. Net front presence, finishes, checks, makes life miserable for opponents. That's the strength of the pipeline. Left wing, no question. Check, check, check. The Capitals are in a good position. Then when you talk about Cristall, you talk about Ivan Miroshnichenko, Lynden Lakovic, Suzdalev, and Ludwig Persson. I think that it gets a bit interesting here. Almost poetic. Your greatest player ever is a left wing. Now your deepest prospect group is also a left wing as well. And some of those great players that are on the left side, I think there is a bit of a glut of talent on the left side. The same thing I don't think necessarily could be said on the right side. And it's not even really that close. You've got Parasek, then Justin Sordiff, who's 23 and hasn't locked down an NHL spot yet. The Capitals put, quite a few of their eggs in the Justin Sordiff basket in the form of 2 draft picks. And what Chris Patrick had said was that there were teams that were offering him the Florida Panthers 1 draft pick. So they had to add a sweetener with 2. And I'm not sure if it was one of those bidding wars, when you're at an auction and you just get carried out of hand. Is Justin Sordiff going to be that guy? I think he is. I just think that he was in a crowded Florida Panthers team, that there was not a clear path for him to the NHL. So when you take a look at it, it's a bit thin on the right side. But if you're going to have a weak spot, wing is easier to fix than center or goalie. And, you take a look at it, these guys can move around a bit. Some of them can anyway, and there's still time. There's still upcoming drafts. There's still trades, because even though I, mentioned quite a few different players in this show as far as the prospect pool, who they drafted this last time around here, that, very well, some of those players could get traded for upgrades, whether it's NHL talent or future draft picks. That I think that if they need to fix something, I think that is something that is pretty easily fixable. The Capitals' big picture are in a really good spot. Left side, center, goalie. Like I mentioned in this segment here, a little bit thin on the right side, but I think there are other great players that will be joining the organization in somehow, some way in the future. All right, so coming up here after the break, one player that you should take notice of. And when we talk the blue line, there's questions. John Carlson, TVR, what's the future of these players going to be? There is a player that is going to change a lot of things on the Capitals blue line. That player is Cole Hutson, and I'll discuss straight ahead. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions, so whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment, and I am so excited for the NFL season, as I imagine you are as well. And if you want to even make it more fun, if you even want to make it more interesting, that is why you need FanDuel. So visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment of the show today, we are talking about a player that is going to be an absolute game changer for the Capitals on the blue line. A blue line that is pretty well buttoned up this season. There are not a lot of question marks. They answered the question about who the 7th defender is going to be. At least on paper, that is going to be Declan Chisholm, as we know that Alex Alexiev is out to the Steel City. But one player that is a bit on the horizon, but might not be as long as some of us think, is Cole Hutson, an absolute game changer. And when might he join the Capitals? That is what we are going to dive in the final segment of the show today. And if that last name sounds familiar, it should, because his brother Lane Hutson is a headline in the National Hockey League most every night during the hockey season. But Cole, he's not trying to live in his brother's shadow. He is carving his own path, his own identity. And honestly, he might be more complete physically right now than Lane was at his age. That's quite a compliment if you have seen his brother play. Quite a dynamic player, one of the best. Spencer Carberry talks about him quite often, that he oftentimes will mix up their first names, but both really great players. And honestly, he might, like I said, be that more complete. And the big thing, like I talked about earlier, has that elite hockey IQ, has the edge work, has the puck control. And he's got that elite bite. Freshman year at BU, 48 points in 39 games. Tim Taylor Award lit up the World Juniors, 11 points in 7 games. And, for a defenseman, that is ridiculous. And when it comes to, him being a young player, and I've mentioned this on the show before as well, is they teach hockey players how to be, all different facets of the game, whether it's nutrition, whether it's skating, whether it's this, that. He is mature. And some of that is, something I think that is, they teach them is, how to do a press conference and how to conduct yourself in the National Hockey League. I think some of that is probably just how he's raised and just being around hockey his whole life, but very mature and a pleasant surprise, and I think that oftentimes some of the young players get their, jabs at them for, perceived weakness in this, or maybe not being as tough as some of the older guys in the league. That maturity in these young players is something that wasn't necessarily the case years ago. But the hard part as Capitals fans, and this kind of, reminds me of the whole Ryan Leonard thing, is we're going to have to be patient. If we remember Ryan Leonard, like I said in segment 1, we were chomping at the bit to get him here. He's going to be going back for his sophomore year. He wants to win a national title, wants to graduate. And, the mature part is he wants to make his mom happy. Quite a good kid that he is there. And character is something that goes a long way. And I know that oftentimes on the show I talk about, I don't care what kind of person you are off the ice, it's what kind of player you are on the ice. And that still holds true. But I think that he is a class act. But I think that he could be joining the Capitals sooner than some of us think, that it might not be years and years to come. The Capitals are actually leaving the door open for him. And we heard this from former GM Brian McClellan when we were talking about Ryan Leonard. If BU season ends and he's ready, they'll try to get him in DC just like they did with Leonard. Wow, wouldn't that be something? I think a lot will be determined on the contract situation with Karlsson and, the overall health and what position the Capitals are in as far as their playoff hopes are concerned. But quite exciting that these young players, like I talked about earlier in this episode, are slowly trickling in. And GM Chris Patrick even said it. He said, quote, "We'll put the push on," unquote. And that's one of the things. I think Chris Patrick is still waiting to put his stamp on this organization. Until this point, he has, given extensions out to Logan Thompson and Chychrun. But I think that if he could get a young player into the system, that would be huge. And I think Caps Nation, we are waiting eagerly to see Hutson on this team. And if that happens, imagine Leonard and Hutson both on this team, 2 young rising stars. Quite a scenario to think about here. But bottom line, prospect pool's not elite, but it's no longer a weakness either. And, I say that, but, some people could say elite, but then you take a look around the organization, some teams are stacked, and some of those teams are stacked with prospects because they have been horrendous for years. I'm looking at you Sharks, I'm looking at you Blackhawks, these kind of teams that their prospect pools are pretty good because, well, their teams have been horrendous for years. But for a team still trying to win in the Ovechkin era and prepare for after he retires, that's the elephant in the room, of course, going into this season is how long is Ovechkin going to be around? Is planning for the future. And I think the Capitals are in a really good place. I think that, of course, most of us were hoping that they would have gone out and made a bigger splash. I think the Capitals did their level best to reel in Nikolai Ehlers. It just wasn't meant to be. Too much money, all of those kind of things. And the Capitals did not want to, deplete their system yet again to reel in a player like that. So anyway, when you take a look at it, the Capitals are in a good position right here, right now, and they're only going to get better in years to come. That is the exciting part. So, the Capitals did make their big splash. They tried to go after Ehlers. They tried to go after Roslovic, but all things considered, I think the Capitals are in a good spot. They're leaning into that youth, something that I think they've wanted to do for seasons. And for right now, I think that the future is bright for the Capitals organization. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.